Hang on, baby. Just a minute. Oh. All right, mama, let's go. Elvis, thank you very much, is brought to us by director Baz Luhrmann and stars Austin Butler, Tom Hanks, and Olivia DeJonge. Baz Luhrmann takes a crack at the king himself in this biopic about Elvis and his promoter, Colonel Tom Parker. So Elvis is about, well, you guessed it, Elvis. Me, myself, I've never really been the biggest fan of Elvis's music. I don't dislike it so much, I just haven't been the biggest fan. It doesn't really fall inside my wheelhouse. The enigma of Elvis and who he was, though, I do find pretty interesting. That being said, though, my wife, well, she regularly refers to Elvis as her baby daddy. So I was able to see the view of this movie from two different perspectives. Hers, a big huge fan of Elvis, and mine, just a casual, not so much fan, but just a casual viewer, I guess. Now, before I get into the specifics of this movie, I gotta talk about its director, Baz Luhrmann. I am not what you would call the biggest fan of Baz Luhrmann. In fact, I haven't really enjoyed any of his movies up to this point. I know the guy's got some really big fans out there, and more power to you. His movies just haven't really spoke to me. Films like Romeo and Juliet and Moulin Rouge, while I do applaud their visual style, the films themselves, the story, the narrative within, I just couldn't get into. Now that being said, that was one of the things about Luhrmann being the director of this film I thought might actually work. Elvis was so over the top and such a big personality, an enigma if you will, that Baz Luhrmann's directing style might actually fit this. And hey, what do you know, that was one of the things about this movie that I thought really worked. His over the top, all over the place, kind of hyper real style really did work here. Because that is what Elvis was, or at least to us the public. He was this larger than life, over the top guy, and Luhrmann is a larger than life, over the top director. So I am pleased to say, if nothing else, this is my favorite Baz Luhrmann movie up to this point. I thought his directing style really fit the story, character, and just overall production. Now, this wasn't the Elvis movie that I was expecting. When it comes to biopics, we typically get a story that tells us a little bit more about the artist or the famous person that the biopic is about. It will encompass a large part of their life, if not all of their life, and we get a little bit more insight into who this person was, what was going on behind the scenes. Kind of like Bohemian Rhapsody or Rocket Man did with Freddie Mercury and Elton John. Or we'll get a story that focuses on a certain time or thing in this person's life so that we get to know them more through that way. Kind of like Walk the Line did with June Carter and Johnny Cash's relationship. Now, Elvis is kind of a culmination of the two, and I'm not 100% sure if it works. This movie does pretty much cover the guy's life from beginning to end. There's a little bit left in the beginning that's kind of hazy, but we do get some of that. What it doesn't do that type of biopic does a lot of the time is give us a lot of insight into who Elvis was, what was going on in his life that we didn't see way back then. Conversely, at first glance, it doesn't seem like the movie goes the other route by focusing on a certain thing or time in Elvis's life either, which makes it seem kind of like a recap of his life. We don't really get any more insight into what was going on with him. It's just kind of a VH1, where are they now, or where were they now, because I mean, you know, he passed away, but just kind of a recap of what happened to the guy, but it's nothing that we already didn't know. But then I realized what this movie was really about. This movie is about the relationship between Elvis and his promoter, the Colonel. Now, when it comes to the Colonel, me myself, just being somebody who's not an Elvis fan, I was totally unaware of this man. Apparently, he was the guy who discovered Elvis and put him through the stratosphere, and he was there with him all the way to the end. The movie is kind of told from his perspective, and this is an interesting idea. However, around about the halfway point of the movie, while the Colonel is definitely still a part of the film, it starts to seem less and less like he's telling this story and like we're just seeing the story unfold. Leading up to about the halfway point of this movie, it was a lot of narration from this Colonel character played by Tom Hanks, and we were seeing things in the light that he saw them. But around that halfway point, the movie just kind of says, oh well, just forget about that and move on, let's just keep on telling the story, but it never really focuses on anything in particular beyond the events between Elvis and the Colonel. It's really weird because then in the end of the movie it picks it back up, but it's like, wait, oh yeah, we're doing that. This is from his perspective, isn't it? But you kind of forget about that because the movie kind of forgot about it too. And this does make the movie seem a bit disjointed at times. It doesn't ruin the experience, but when you look back at it, you're like, wow, that was like two different movies in one. Honestly, me myself not being an Elvis fan, I enjoyed the second part of this movie more than the first. That's not to say I didn't enjoy the first part, but it is kind of like like two different movies, and I like that second movie more. The second half of this movie does seem more like a traditional biopic that we're used to. While we never get a whole lot more that we didn't already know about Elvis, we do get a little bit more in that second half than we do in the first. The first is almost like a recap. It's like getting us up to speed to this certain point that the story wants to start to unfold. The first half is also the most Baz Luhrmann part of the movie out of the whole entire thing. The first half of this movie is like an ADHD kid was just set wild on a film set. This movie just starts and it goes like 150 miles an hour, and it doesn't stop until around that middle part. And while there is some entertainment value there is something to be had with that type of filmmaking, it is a bit exhausting. Like, this thing is just going. And when things finally do just kind of slow down and start to tell the story that it wants to tell, things start to get a lot more interesting. That being said, I do have to admit that I never really felt closer to Elvis. I never really felt like I learned that much more about him. I felt like the characters were always at arm's length. We're never let in. We never get that insight that we want from a good biopic. Sure, I learned about Colonel Tom Parker, and there were some other things I didn't know about Elvis, but that's me. When it comes to the fans, there's nothing there for the most part that they didn't already know. And I know that Elvis's life was just put out there, that there's so much information about him, there's not really much more to know, but I feel like in these types of movies, we want to know more about the person. We want something deeper. We want to see what's going on with this person when the lights and the cameras aren't on. And I never really felt like we totally got that. There are some situations that come up. We see what's going on behind the scenes, but it never felt like we were really getting to know who Elvis was. And I do think that part of that is because this movie, while it is billed as Elvis, it's about Elvis, it's not really about Elvis. It's about Colonel Tom Parker, or at least Colonel Tom Parker and Elvis. It's their relationship. It's the things that happen between these two men and what they did to each other, and how their relationship and partnership went down a really bad road is what this movie's about. And I did find that interesting and entertaining, and once I noticed that's what this movie was about, it did make the experience a bit more digestible. Now, something about this movie that might not be as digestible for a lot of people will be its length. Holy fuck, this movie's long. It is 2 hours and 40 minutes long, and that is a really long time for some people to sit in a theater. Now, according to my wife, who, as I mentioned, is a huge Elvis fan, she said it never seemed like it was that long. For me, no, it didn't necessarily seem like it was almost 3 hours long, but it did seem long. As we started to cross the finish line of this movie, I was starting to get a little bit antsy and kind of like, okay, how long's this thing got? I was never bored or anything like that, but you just start to feel that time for sure. Did it harm the experience? For me, not so much, but it probably would be a film that'd be a little bit easier to take in at home when you can pause it. Our performances overall are really good. Austin Butler as Elvis did a fantastic job here. And I found it interesting that as the movie goes on, it seemed like he started to look more and more like Elvis. Maybe I'm just used to a more older Elvis look, and that's why I thought that. He doesn't necessarily look exactly like Elvis, but that's not what I need. I don't need the people in my biopic to look exactly like the person they're playing. I'm more interested in the performance they're giving. He looks enough like Elvis to absolutely get the job done, but it's the mannerisms, the way he acts, the way he talks is just like Elvis. This guy killed it in that department. All the supporting cast was very well too. Now, Tom Hanks, who we know always does a great job, and while he does do a great job here, the prosthetics he's wearing, while not terrible, sometimes do let him down. It's not so much his performance, that was actually really good, but he is wearing a massive amount of prosthetics throughout this entire movie, and he is in the movie a lot. And there are a couple of times that these prosthetics become very noticeable and can pull you out of the film a bit. And that is kind of unfortunate because his performance is pretty good, but sometimes it's hard to see the performance through all that makeup. Overall, though, I think everybody here did a really good job. If you love Elvis, you're probably gonna like this movie. If you hate Elvis, you're probably not gonna like this movie. If you're someone like me who just kind of has a pedestrian knowledge of Elvis and doesn't really hate or love the guy, then you'll probably find something to enjoy here as well. Guys, overall, Elvis was an entertaining movie, and in my opinion, Baz Luhrmann's best movie to date. The movie does struggle on what it wants the story to be about at times, and I wish it had delved a little bit deeper into its characters. Some of the prosthetic work can pull you out of it sometimes, and for some people, that length is gonna be a problem. First time you ever heard a guy say that, huh? However, what we do get is some really great performances, an interesting story for casual viewers, and while at times a bit shallow, an entertaining ride overall that I think is absolutely worth a rent.
All he wanted was, hey, this.
I have to return some videotape.
Like I said, if you're an Elvis fan, well, you've probably already gone and seen this movie. But if you're more like me and you're just kind of somewhere in the middle, then yeah, check this one out one night. I think you'll have a pretty good time with it. So there it is, guys, my review of Elvis. If you enjoyed and want more content like this, hit that subscribe button and help my little channel grow. If you want to help out the channel, check out my Patreon in the description below. Become a jarhead and get some of the awesome benefits that go along with that, like these guys. And possibly check out my top tier and become a bad motherfucker like my man Silverlock and Marge G. If you liked what I had to say, give me a like. If not, let me know in the comments below why. And as always, stay sexy, Graceland.
You bled me dry and you still want more?
I am a promoter. That is what I do. Are you ready to fly?
I'm ready to fly.
Now, speaking of Graceland, I wanted to mention that I have actually been to Graceland. I used to live in Nashville. That's about 3 hours from Graceland, and it was beautiful. It was a really interesting place. They got like this whole compound going on with like restaurants and museums, and you get to walk through the house, and they got the little audio thing. It's just a really cool experience, and I do suggest anybody who has the opportunity, go there and check it out. Me, myself, like I said, I'm not an Elvis fan, but it was really interesting to go there. I probably got more from that experience than this movie overall. However, I gotta say, everything else there in Memphis, where it's from, what the fuck? Nothing against anybody who lives there, and I hope you don't take offense to this, because I think it's just kind of common knowledge at this point, but what the fuck happened to that city? It's a fucking shithole. Like, while you're driving up to Graceland, let's just say it is not what I expected. I'm driving down there knowing I'm going to see like one of the most famous human beings ever to live's house, his mansion, and I'm like, what in the fuck is all this shit? I think we took a wrong turn somewhere. I mean, god damn, what the fuck, people of Memphis? Say something to your city councilman or something.